This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. So today I'm joined by a special guest, someone I've been trying to speak to for a while, been trying to get him on the show. He's a former international cricketer and has a keen interest in performance psychology. And this is what informs our conversation, where we go on to talk about mental toughness in cricket, the pressures of playing at an international level, and the relationship between sport performance and business. Enjoy. Hi, Jeremy. Could you just share with the listeners your background and your passion for cricket and sports psychology?
Well, it's great to be with you, David, and share some thoughts with your audience. I suppose my passion for psychology, I didn't really know it was psychology at the time, but I was playing professional cricket and playing international cricket in the one-day side for England. And there were just some days where I felt bulletproof, confident, focused, like a world beater. And occasionally that happened. I got man of the match on my England debut, hit the winning runs in a 2020 final, was part of a team that won 7 or 8 trophies. So I had some real success, but there were also some moments of real panic and real low confidence and just buckling under pressure, really choking. There was definitely one in front of 120,000 people in India playing for England that I stepped out to try and be the hero in front of that enormous crowd. I mean, Lord's is about 25,000, I think, and this was so many times bigger than that. The crowd screaming was like reverberating through my sternum like a cheap school disco. And the sort of noise was deafening. And I just remember running out Freddie Flintoff, who was the only chance of England winning the game. And then Harbhajan Singh was running up to bowl, and he may as well have been bowling a hand grenade. I wasn't watching it. I completely panicked, played a stupid shot and, walked back to the pavilion getting pelted with onion barges. And that was the sort of seminal moment when I realised that I'd spent thousands and thousands of hours talking about techniques and strategies and, fielding positions and stances and backlifts, and so little time actually talking about the emotional side, the psychological side, and how my biggest opponent wasn't India or the crowd or Harbhajan Singh's doosra. It was actually the voice that was in my head, which was louder than all 100,000 people put together. So that really set me off with a passion for understanding how our brain works, understanding how elite performers work. And that I then did a master's degree in sports psychology at Loughborough just before I retired. And that gave me a chance then to start working in sports psychology with some of the world's elite teams. But that was definitely the founding moment of Sporting Edge. And I know you listen to my podcast called Inside the Mind of Champions. And that was what I was fascinated about, what was going on inside the mind of these incredible people who could perform under pressure, who could, perform seamlessly when the stakes were at the highest. And that was a research quest, really, that's kept going for 10 or 12 years. So it's fascinating.
So based on your understanding now of the field and the lessons you've learned from your own podcast there, what advice would you give the young Jeremy in that situation in front of the 120,000 noisy spectators?
Well, I probably wouldn't say anything, to be honest, because it's led to quite an exciting second career, and I think I'd have been quite bored and lost without it. So I probably wouldn't change that particular mistake. And I did go on to play for England again, so it wasn't all violin stories. But I think what I've learned is that our brain's built for safety. Our brain's built to keep us safe. And anytime we go into a high challenge environment, we can easily catastrophize that into a high threat environment where our self-esteem's on the line, our professional reputation, our ego's on the line. So basically our brain hijacks us often, and people probably will relate to this if you've ever been asked to read out in the class or speak at a best man's speech or speak in a conference or something. Your brain tells you that you want to get out of the way of this challenge where you're going to be judged by all these people. So you start speaking really quickly. And that's basically your brain saying, get back into row C, into your quiet, comfortable seat in the shadows, get out of the spotlight, and let's get this out of the way as fast as you can. So your brain scrambles, you think irrationally, and you walk and talk and move much faster than you would normally. And often for elite performers where you're putting in golf or you're throwing darts or you're about to face a spin bowler in India, you need to be calm and you need to be patient and you need to be relaxed and you need to be instinctive, because that's how you learnt your skill. Yet now in this high pressure cauldron of judgment, where your brain's starting to think about what the newspapers are going to write tomorrow or what's going to happen if you lose, and all those sort of social judgments, you actually don't watch the ball in the moment, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think if I was going to advise that, cricketer out in the fields in India, I would say slow down, think calmly, one ball at a time. Remember the past successes that you've had. You've been a good enough cricketer to be picked for England. So it's not like you're just a beginner. Go back to your strengths and try and do the basics brilliantly, one ball at a time. But of course, instead, I was rushing, walking around like a madman, hurrying around, wasn't thinking what I was doing, and tried to hit the ball into Mumbai. And we were playing in Calcutta at the time. So it was a pretty optimistic shot. So I got that wrong, but I think we can all relate to those moments of emotional hijack. And actually, the challenge for me isn't necessarily beating India. It's staying true and managing my own mind and managing my own state so that I can perform and deliver my best performance, whether that's a corporate speech, which is my new type of performance, or whether it was, playing in a tense final in a cricket match.
Right. I could take this 100 different ways now from what you said. I love the start of the episode there. So I'll go with the one ball at a time approach. Obviously, we hear that an awful lot, don't we, in cricket, in different sports. It sounds so straightforward and easy. How can you actually help a performer get into that mentality?
Well, I think we tend to see our sport as a continuous game. So if you like, golf might be a good example, that you might think you're playing golf for 4 hours, but you're actually playing golf for 21 minutes, and there's a lot of walking around that. So playing golf is standing over the ball, assessing the distance, assessing the swing, assessing the club, assessing the landing position of the ball, assessing the swing shape that you want to play, and then choosing it, calming yourself down and executing that shot. And then as soon as the ball's up in the air, and hopefully up in the air, you're off and into the next phase. So the timer stops. So the time between shots, the time between balls is actually the most fascinating. For me in cricket, most people talk about the highlights, which is the clock starts, the camera starts, the bowler runs in, the fast bowler, all angry, all sweaty, runs in, comes past the bowler, jumps up, delivers the ball with all their aggression. The batsman hits it, ducks from it, gets bowled by it, whatever happens, and then the sort of highlights are over. To me, I'm fascinated about what happens in the lowlights, the time between balls, as the batsman steps away to square leg, as the batsman's starting to think about reviewing the last delivery, and sort of almost like a car wash, you're trying to get that last ball out of your system, whether it was a great shot or a terrible shot. Neither of them are relevant. You just need to take the lesson from that to be wiser and more skillful in the next moment. So it may be that you now know that the ball is spinning or swinging. It may be that the bowler's faster than you thought it was. It may be that the ball's keeping low. All of those things are useful for the next ball. So we then need to prime our sort of conscious mind to say, okay, make sure you're hitting the ball straight, back past him. Don't predict what it's going to be, but just get yourself into a good balanced state. And we can use little counting techniques, little breathing techniques to refocus our mind. And ultimately, when that next ball is released, even though our brain wants to keep us safe and to predict what this angry fast bowler is going to do, that's often the wrong thing. And even though you might be on the back foot premeditating the bouncer because your brain's telling you, watch out, he looks scary and he's swearing a lot, actually, it might be a half volley and you should have been with your weight forward. So the key to staying in the moment is having these little mini structures and performance routines that bring structure not only to your physical mannerisms and habits, but your psychological habits. So we often see people scratching the crease and moving their thigh pad and twiddling their bat between balls, and they do it every ball. Now, that is a physical habit or a mannerism. What I'm interested in is, what are the psychological hooks that are, and sort of boundaries that are happening? So, for example, you might step away to square leg, and while you're looking around the field, you might say, okay, how did that last ball go? What felt good? What do you need to do for the next delivery? Where does your weight need to be? Okay, so weight forward, try and hit the ball back past the bowler. That's all good. Are you ready? And it's only at that point then that I punch my thigh pad and say clear. And then I start twiddling my bat, take a big breath in so that I've, relaxed my shoulders and I've relaxed my diaphragm and I feel really focused on my breath. And then I tap the floor with my bat and saying ready. And that ready is a psychological cue to clear my mind of all the technical stuff that's been going on. But every ball I tap the ground. So why don't I anchor that with a psychological trigger that says, okay, forget last ball. Now it's about focusing on the next one. Let's be clean. Let's be instinctive. Let me respond to what I see rather than premeditating everything and feeling completely pre-programmed, because that's dangerous in instinctive sports.
Now, I'd imagine as well, if you've been struck on the helmet, or you've been shaken up, or you've had an opportunity to knock it to the boundary and you've missed, to a lot of people that's going to mess with their routines, and they're going to find it difficult to execute and follow through in that way.
Yeah, that's part of the game. That's why I said at the beginning, I think, yes, playing against India, or yes, playing against your local club rival, in the Bedfordshire League or wherever you are, that feels like the big thing. But actually, that's not the battle. The battle is with yourself and with your emotions and with your thoughts, standing in the middle of that sports field on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday lunchtime, and you've got to see your team through to a draw or through to the lunch break or whatever it might be. And you're battling with your own frustrations. You're battling with your own ego that you should have hit it for 6, or your mate up the other end's on 90 odd and you're still on 20 odd. Those are all comparisons. Those are all distractions. The guy at Gully's just chirped me for, what I look like or what I'm wearing or whatever. That's them trying to distract me from my process, and creating that little bubble of excellence and my best habits. You've got to stay in there as long as you can. And I've worked with some of the world's best ever players, international record-breaking Test cricketers. And this is what they do. They focus on their breathing. They focus on their self-talk between deliveries. They focus on almost, creating each moment as a golden nugget or a pearl and stringing it together into a necklace. And if you can make that necklace, 100 pearls long, then you've probably batted for a couple of hours and you might be close to a century. But if all you're doing is thinking about your runs, and if all you're doing is thinking about, what the newspapers are going to say, then you've lost focus on the ball. And that's the only thing that matters, the next delivery.
So essentially what you're saying is it's the whole thing about controlling the controllables there. Focus on the internal things that you can control and put to one side the external things.
Yeah, and probably the best example of that, and it's something that I always tried to do, and it's certainly when I've coached teams, I've always tried to encourage them to do. If the ball is spinning or if the wicket is unpredictable and some are keeping low and some are bouncing up, that is completely out of your control. But make sure that the delivery that gets you out is one where the ball misbehaves. Don't get out to the ball after the one that spun and the ball that you got out to did nothing, because that means your mind was still fixed on the last shot. And another example of that, I was working in the Indian Premier League, and one of our very talented, but let's say his mental discipline wasn't outstanding, batsman, played a beautiful reverse sweep and the ball went for 4. The next ball, he ran down the wicket and tried to hit it for 6 and got out. So he came in and I let him, place his bat gently down in his bag as he would have done. And then I said to him, so tell me about the ball that got you out. And he said, oh yeah, I just came down the wicket. I tried to hit it too hard and lifted my head. And I said, that's not the ball that got you out. The ball that got you out was the reverse sweep where you thought you were at King Kong, and you couldn't forget that ball. So you were on such a high from the last shot that you then tried to play another high risk shot when you didn't need to. So it was the contamination of the glory that infiltrated the next ball. And, part of this mental toughness and this mindset that we want is whether we played a good shot or a bad shot last time, it's gone. What we've got to do is focus on making the next moment as high quality as we can.
That's really interesting. I've been watching the IPL. I don't think I've missed a game yet. Certainly with the highlights. I love watching it. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your insights into working in that type of environment. So yeah, feel free to tell the listeners a bit more.
Well, I was very lucky I was still captain at Leicestershire in 2008, and I was asked by one of the owners of the teams, the Rajasthan Royals, to go out and because I'd been involved in Gloucestershire's success and Leicestershire's 2020 wins, he asked me, and I knew my psychology masters had been done, go out and help this team to get set up, for this Indian Premier League. I said, I've never heard anything about it. What is it? And he said, I've just bought a team called the Rajasthan Royals. It was actually $67 million that the team was worth, which was worth a little bit more than Leicestershire cricket at the time. And the captain was the legendary Shane Warne. So I flew out. I was supposed to be out there for 10 days. Warne had actually booked me a flight home, on the flight because he wasn't particularly a fan of psychology or coaches. So he booked me a flight just in case I threw too much psychobabble at him. And we ended up hitting it off. I worked. He asked me to stay. I went past the 10 days that I was meant to be there. And we ended up going on to win that first IPL. So it was an amazing experience because you'd got players from the Caribbean, from South Africa, from New Zealand, from Australia, from England, Pakistan, young players from India, massive legends from India, all in the same team under the expert guidance of Warney. And we had to build a team culture there in 10 days, basically, before we played Delhi with Sehwag and Mumbai Indians with Sachin Tendulkar. And I think the way we focused on building, individual roles and trust and a shared bond in the team definitely helped us, because most of the teams were focused on the iconic players, their salaries, and what each individual could do on their own. We talked about partnerships and working together at the crease and getting the next batsman in. So we were always talking about interdependence in the team rather than iconic individuals, because if the iconic individual's struggling and they give the game away, they give their wicket away, then the next one might come in and do the same if they find it hard. Whereas we were measuring partnerships and time people batted together and rotating the strike and those kind of things, which meant we had perhaps a slightly calmer strategy, but a much more solid strategy and a stronger team bond.
I suppose when you're talking there about teamwork, that'll overlap nicely into your work now in a business setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't see any huge difference between the mindset of the elite performers that we've interviewed for our content and the elite performers in business. I think you've got to have an inspirational goal. One of the, I was very lucky to work with England Rugby with Eddie Jones, and the thing he speaks about in one of my podcast episodes is the need to set these transformational goals that, don't just say we want to win the tournament. You want to turn into a different team. You want to feel like you're a different player at the end of this season because you've pushed yourself, you've stretched yourself, you've redefined the way you're perceived. And I think that's really exciting. So I think the elite performers have that. They're able to almost visualize in technicolor what the end of season goal might look like. So you can imagine yourself leading your club's batting record, or you can imagine yourself being the young player of the year. You can see yourself with that trophy. And then every choice you make through the days, through your training, the way you practice your weaknesses, the way you focus in between balls, the way you try and convert a 40 into an 80, all of these things are aligned to that aspirational goal that you've set. And then, of course, we've got the focus and the discipline and the teamwork that we spoke about. And for those people listening who are coaches and managers, we've got to almost be a performance detective, trying to understand what is it that's going to make this individual tick? What motivates them? How can I unlock that and make them passionate about learning and developing and improving? Because that, if I can do that for all people in my business team or my sports team, then, we're going to be twice the team at the end of the season. So I think all of those characteristics are relevant to sport and business.
I would have thought that would be one of the real key things there, is treating people as individuals, and in order to unlock their motivation and their personal values.
Yeah, and again, I think I've been very lucky to travel around the world and see how different coaching cultures approach that. I worked with the Sri Lankan cricket team for a couple of years, running into the World Cup, and Kumar Sangakkara, Mahela Jayawardene, and Lasith Malinga were in that side, Dilshan. So an amazing set of talent. And listening to Lasith Malinga, the commonly known as the slinger, people might recognise him where the bowler's trying to get their arm up above their head and rub their arm past their ear. He was sort of scooping it around his waist and bowling these incredible slinging Yorkers. And that would not have been allowed to pass through the system in the UK. I've got no doubt about it. Coaches would have dismantled that natural flair. They would have talked about, stress fractures of the back and efficiency of bowling. But I think almost, the more predictable and the more mechanical and the more metronomic and perfect a bowling action is, the more used to that action or template the batsman becomes. So something that's away from the norm, like a Muralitharan or a Malinga, they actually make you really search for the ball and make it harder to pick up the line and length. So if they can stay strong enough physically, which Lasith could, and if they can do the repetition to become accurate enough, then they can pose a real threat. But, they've got to be allowed to nurture that rare and different talent rather than being sort of copy and paste like everybody else.
And I suppose that's nowadays in youth sport, that's the challenge, isn't it? It's the difficulty, because often, kids are getting pigeonholed into roles, and that I suppose that we are losing that individuality.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've got to let, 80%, 70%, we know how people should be playing and what the best techniques are to give us the best and most predictable and reliable performance. But if somebody's got a little bit of flair and it's different, I think we should encourage them to use that, really. The other thing that I would say about youth sport is don't underestimate the value of not specialising too early. I think we think that it's so competitive. We all want our kids on the Manchester United Academy or the Surrey Cricket Academy aged 8, and that's great. But equally them, doing gymnastics or football or rugby or, martial arts for a period is also really beneficial to hand-eye coordination, movement patterns, different balance, creating strength and different, core stability. If somebody's a gymnast or diving or dance or martial arts, they're going to have to work very, much on their core. And all of those things are going to be relevant if you're going to become a fast bowler or a, scrum half in your teens. So I would think, yes, let people have a bit of natural flair, but also let them explore different sports. And if your kids can play 4 sports up until they're 13, that's great. I don't think you need to specialise, much before that.
Yeah, I suppose as well as the physical benefits, the mental benefits for playing different sports, there's probably less pressure in some respects. Whereas if you're playing a sport at 10, 11 years old and you're there for 12, 15 hours a week, then it's although you're a mini Premier League footballer or you're a mini Premiership rugby player at such a young age.
Yeah, I don't know what the stats are for the number of people that make it, but I can't imagine it's much more than 1 or 2%. So if you imagine that you're going to be part of the 97 or 98% that aren't going to make it, then I know that sounds a little bit negative, but you're probably better off thinking like that. And the cream will always rise. I don't think you necessarily need to specialise early. But as you say, the social benefits of having 3 or 4 different social networks, you've got your school and you've got your 3 sports that you play, one in the summer and two in the winter or whatever it might be, or hobbies. That's absolutely fantastic from a, psychosocial perspective. And as I mentioned, you've got the different skills that each of the different sports bring. Maybe rugby, gives you that physical tenacity. Maybe football gives you that speed and ball control, and cricket gives you that, all-round ability to handle setbacks and have your performance scrutinized, because there's so much more statistical transparency. You scored 8 runs off 23 deliveries and you bowled 2 overs, no maidens, 0 for 42 or whatever. Rugby and football don't have that. So each of the different sports brings a different physical challenge, social challenge, and psychological challenge. And I think that's the benefit of it.
So I've loved the conversation, Jeremy. Could you just sum up our conversation with 3 takeaways for the listeners?
Well, I think your mindset is the most important driver of your performance. I think clearly the physical elements and the tactical and technical elements are important. But for me, once you've mastered those basic skills, your mindset is the biggest difference between your best and worst day. And I don't think we spend long enough working on it, really. And I think there are some skills. Obviously, your podcast, David, is a great resource, and your website and your coaching that you offer. I think that's fantastic to any youngsters that need support. But definitely, the more we can build our coping resources and our resilience and our confidence, that's going to be absolutely critical. I think, for me, when we see talent coming into some of the top academies, I've been lucky to work in Premier League soccer and international cricket and England rugby. And I think our talent is just our passport into the club, really. When you get little Johnny into Chelsea Football Academy, age 14, all the other 30 players there are going to be equally gifted. Now that passport needs activating with tenacity, hard work, almost an entrepreneurial spirit to explore and test and learn and improve and recover and adapt. The players that I'm interested in, the ones that have, sat on the bench or torn their Achilles or played in a different position or traveled the world and lived abroad in a different culture. That's what it takes to be an elite performer at the top level for a decade or so. And while we definitely need the intellectual engine in the workplace or in school, or we need the hand-eye coordination in our sports clubs, it's that inner driver of motivation and tenacity and resilience that's really the defining characteristic of the elite performers that stay at the top.
Brilliant, fascinating stuff. Can you share with the listeners where they can find you if they want to reach out to you?
Sure. My business is called Sporting Edge. So we offer performance coaching to elite sports leaders and teams. We've got some free resources that people will be able to download. And my podcast, Inside the Mind of Champions, is in the Apple Top 10. And that looks at the mindset that's in elite sport and business and how we can learn from both of those to give ourselves some inspiration and some professional development for ourselves and our teams. So sportingedge.com and Inside the Mind of Champions on the podcast channel.
Fantastic. I'll put those into the show notes, and please do check it out. There's some fantastic content. So again, a big thank you for your time.
A pleasure.
Well, that was another really enjoyable conversation there with Jeremy. I especially liked when he talked about playing cricket in front of 120,000 mad, really noisy fans and how you actually handle the nerves and the pressure of that situation. So some parting thoughts on that. If you think about it, when you play your best, when you're in the zone, you've got a quiet mind. And as Jeremy alluded to, thinking about pre-performance routines are essential in order to quieten the mind, to put yourself in that optimal functioning zone. So I've got 5 things for you to think about in terms of your pre-performance routines or your pre-shot routines. We've got deep breathing, visualization, the use of cue words, there's mindfulness to be able to quieten the mind, and then lastly, trying to execute with automaticity. So without actually trying to control the way you go about things, trying to control your technique. And this all applies if you're a batsman, if you're a bowler, Or if you're playing a shot or a putt in golf, you're going to go and execute a tennis serve or a free kick or a penalty in football. But as well, and really importantly, and this is something many athletes don't think about at all, and often coaches don't think about as well, it's the time in between shots, the time in between when you're batting or you're bowling or when you're playing golf. That's essential. That's a vitally important time where you can put some of these strategies in play in order to quieten the mind and shut out the noise and those external factors that Jeremy and I talked about. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. If you want to find out more, or if you want to speak to me at all, you could join the Sports Psychology Hub, a thriving environment that I've created on Facebook. You'll be able to get in touch with me directly through there, as well as access some of the different bits of content that are shared and the other insights from our other fantastic members. Have a great week ahead. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.